Before, the New World was sparsely settled at the time of Columbus. When the first Europeans arrived at what they soon called the New World, they encountered spaces like nothing they'd ever seen before. Vast virgin forests stretched to the water's edge in some areas. Others found open plains and what they believed and reported as small populations of natives. In Mesoamerica, the Spaniards and Portuguese encountered the cities of the Mayan, Incan, and Aztec civilizations. In North America, the early European arrivals reported the Indians living in relatively small villages and towns. With no idea of the size and diversity of the North American continent, rulers and scholars in Europe believed the New World was sparsely populated by uncivilized peoples, as wild as the game which teemed in the woods. In truth, between 60 and 70 million natives lived on the North American continent from the Arctic Circle to its southernmost extremity. Numerous cultures emerged on the continent before the European arrival, including the Mound Builders, the Confederation of the Iroquois, the Hopi and Pueblo, and the Inuit in the north. The various Indian nations and clans were connected by a complex system of trails through the eastern woods and on the plain. Population in North America which exceeded that of the continent from whence they came. Number 3. The North American natives did not engage in warfare with each other. Beginning in the 1960s and continuing through the present day, a myth over intertribal warfare among the American tribes gained acceptance. The myth essentially blames the Europeans for introducing warfare to North America. Its proponents claimed that native tribes did not make war on one another, other than in demonstrations of courage by touching an enemy with a coup stick. The claim is nonsense. Archaeological evidence and the various tribes' own folklore describe centuries of warfare between tribes across the entire continent. Cannibalism among the North American tribes was ritualized. Eating the flesh of enemy warriors killed in battle or tortured as prisoners was recorded contemporaneously by witnesses. The Western Plains saw numerous wars between the various tribes competing for the resources offered by the land. The nomadic tribes followed the buffalo, their chief source of meat, furs, and tools manufactured from the bones. In the eastern woodlands, European explorers found many of the tribes living in villages and towns protected by palisades and extensive alarm systems in place to warn of an impending encroachment. The completely peaceful, idyllic existence described by some required neither. Warfare between tribes did not end with a united attempt to wipe out the arriving Europeans. Instead, many tribes allied themselves with the new arrivals, happy to have their superior weapons available for use against ancient enemies. Number 2. Their religions were based on a great spirit. Hollywood created the myth of Indians worshipping a great spirit, though they had other gods and spiritual entities as well. The North American Indians had as many religious systems as tribes and differing ways of worshipping. Some, such as the Pueblo, worshipped the crops as they grew in the fields. Some tribes believed that spirits controlled the weather and developed rituals to appease them. Nearly all worshipped the sun in some form or another, as well as the moon and other celestial bodies. Omens revealed through trances achieved by various means bore great spiritual significance and affected the direction of personal and tribal affairs. The Iroquois did believe in a great spirit, the creator of all things, including the spirit which flowed through all things. The Mohawk, like many tribes, believed that all existence was imbued with spirit. Nearly all the North American Indians held similar beliefs, creating religions based on animism, the idea that all things possess life in some form and hence are animated. The belief extended to rocks, water, the weather, animals, birds, trees, and even sounds. The spirits in control could be either evil or good, with existence a continuous struggle between the extremes. Many eastern tribes believed the smoke from tobacco carried messages to the spirits, and smoking was a major part of religious ceremonies. Number 1. They grew only simple crops to supplement their diets of meat and fish. Native American tribes are connected to maize, a type of corn which they grew so extensively that it came to be known as Indian corn. They also grew beans of several types, gourds to serve as utensils, pumpkins for food, and other forms of squash. Along the eastern seaboard, Indians husbanded tobacco crops from Florida to the Connecticut Valley. Through time, myths emerged about the Indians, which led to the belief that they sustained themselves with game and fish, supplemented by just a few berries and nuts harvested from the forests. Not so. Many Indian villages had extensive farms with the crops grown communally. As with all farmers, crops grown depended on the local climate and soil conditions. The Spanish in the south were astonished to see Indians eating freely of tomatoes, at the time believed in Europe to be poisonous. In the southwest, progressive farming techniques such as terracing and crop rotation were applied by Indian farmers. Indian crops included potatoes and sweet potatoes, several types of peppers, peanuts, avocados, sunflowers, and wild rice. Most Indian villages had communal storehouses to store crops for the winter months. Orchards cultivated by Indians provided cherries, apples, and crab apples. They also resorted freely to native plants for greens, including dandelions pine and chicory.
So you see, Black Native Americans not only lived here, but we thrived here. And we thrived for thousands of years before Columbus. As a matter of fact, blacks were in this country even before the birth of the Savior, before Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach.
California Native American identity. The original indigenous inhabitants of California were the descendants of West Africa, South America's Olmeca Zai Empire, 1500 to 400 BCE, Egypt, Asia, and the Pacific Islands, creating a mixed cultural nation that thrived for thousands of years in peace.
The following is what an exhibition of European explorers actually found upon their arrival in North America. There were huge aqueducts transported America's water from fresh springs. But what impressed most were special merchant areas filled with timber and tile and other building materials being bought and sold. There were green grocers, streets where everyone could buy every sort of vegetable, fruit, honey, and chocolate. Astonished by personal cleanliness and hygiene of the colorfully dressed people and by their extravagant use of soaps, deodorant, and breath sweeteners. According to Beverly, there were nations that were scientifically advanced. They were highly civilized populations with an abundance of gold and wealth, whose history spanned thousands of years. Ancient America was notably one of the most advanced civilizations in antiquity. This was before Christ, before the Spaniards, before Mexicans, before the Clovis people who crossed the Bering Straits, before what is now known as the Native American Indian or Euro conversions. No European who had tasted the life of Indians can afterwards not bear to live in any other society. Benjamin Franklin. Franklin also wrote, "There is no force in Indian societies, no prisons, no officers to inflict punishment." Benjamin Franklin. You see, we weren't all brought on ships called Jesus, Liberty, Grace, Justice, or Mercy. Our ancestors were already here, natives to this land, long before Columbus.
Gigantic stone heads in central Mexico. The Olmec civilization was the first significant civilization in Mesoamerica deemed mother culture of Mexico by some historians. This civilization, dominated by Africans, is best known for the colossal carved heads in central Mexico that served as even more evidence that Africans sailed to the New World before Columbus. The heads are clearly crafted in the likeness of Africans. The same civilization that created these giant heads was also responsible for introducing written language, arts, sophisticated astronomy, and mathematics to a Mesoamerican civilization, ancient African historian Professor Ivan van Sertima explained.
We do want to point out that there is evidence of other races in the Americas prior to the arrival of Columbus. There were Asians, Pacific Islanders, and there's even evidence of Europeans before Columbus. But the landscape was definitely dominated by the black people, the black Native Americans. Many black people in this country have been told that we have so-called Indian blood. I know that I have, and many others have the same experience. Well, chances are it's the truth. When you look at the characteristics that many of us have with the high cheekbones, etc., there's a good possibility that more than we know that we are Native Americans. While we know that many of our ancestors did come in on slave ships. However, we know that there is proof that millions upon millions of our ancestors were here before Columbus, before the transatlantic slave trade. So yes, folks, there is overwhelming evidence that suggests that the first Americans were actually black people. There is archaeological evidence, there's written evidence, and there's oral evidence, which proves that black people are the first Americans. The Black Excellence and Abundance Channel, where Black history